Seeking God. What does it mean to seek God? This 63rd Psalm that Jay read for us has to do with the idea of seeking God. And we hear a lot today about looking for God or finding God, or where is He in my life, looking to see where it is that God is around us. And this morning we'd like to look at the 63rd Psalm and to pick out some ideas that the psalmist put on this topic of looking for God or seeking for God. The first thing that I would notice about relationships that are pursued is that they are a privilege. And it is a privilege to pursue relationships with others. You know, if you think about it, there are at least two essential parts of the equation if you are going to pursue a relationship with someone. Number one, they have to be available. And number two, to have a true relationship, they have to be willing or desire that relationship with you. You know, oftentimes our politicians are great examples of this. They run for office, and we see this happening right now, and they make all kinds of promises. Here's what I'm going to do for you. Here is why you should give me your vote, because you will like what I have to do for you. Well, I called a local politician's office one time because I was having an issue that I felt he could help with. And he's my state representative. And you know, I was unable to talk with him. His secretary filtered the conversation, and I wasn't trying to be persuasive or very detailed with what I was after, because I had someone else in mind of who I wanted to make my case to. And I did not get the opportunity to speak to my state representative. Now, can you imagine if you tried to call your congressman? Oh, you can write a letter if you would like. You can make a phone call and leave it with their secretary. But how unavailable is, or as a role, is our representatives, our politicians? There's no relationship there, is there? And they are just on a very local level, a very small level, our representatives, our leaders for this country. Can you imagine how much more reserved or how much more removed the creator of the universe could be? He has so much on his plate. Can you see him filtering his calls, screening his calls, if you would? I don't have time for Sonny this morning. Jerry, you're going to have to wait. Eric, I'm not sure your petition is real. It is a privilege to seek after God. I came home Thursday evening, and I had a very important task on my list of things to do that evening. I had to fix my manure spreader. And I looked up at the house as I pulled in, and I saw a strange vehicle. And I called Amanda, and I said, Amanda, where are you? And Emily's been coming down and babysitting on Thursday some for us, so I thought maybe Emily had driven a different vehicle. And Amanda was out somewhere. She says, I'm at home. I said, well, who's there? She said, the gardeners. Our dear friends that we worshiped with for several years in Ligonier with us this morning. But you know, I dropped that important job, that joyful task of fixing my manure spreader to go up because I was willful and wanted to make myself available to pursue and to refresh the relationship that we have with one another. Well, I mentioned that so oftentimes we can't even get a hold of our politicians. Can we truly believe that if we seek after God, the creator of the universe, the being, the force that is in charge of not only having made the earth, but making sure that it all continues in a somewhat organized way, can I really have confidence that he'll hear my plea, that he will be there for me? You see, it's a true privilege that God is giving us to pursue a relationship with us, because not only is he available, but I would suggest that he is willing to have a relationship and is open to an intimate relationship with you and I. The reasons for that are as follows. Number one, our God is not just the creator of this universe. He is the head of our family. He is our Father. And you see, there's a very different interaction that I have when I call my Father and I have a need of him or I want him to do something versus calling a politician. He has an invested interest in me. He has a love for me. He has a desire to see me to do well. And when I call my Father, he makes himself available if there's a real need. And that is the case, and part of the privilege that we have with pursuing a relationship with our Heavenly Father. In Galatians, the 4th chapter, and verses 6 through 7, here is a passage that has deep meaning for the Christian. There, Paul wrote to the Galatians and said, "Because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, in the Spirit which calls Abba, or dear Father. So you are no longer slave, but a son, and since you are a son, God has made you also an heir." You see, and that's the kind of relationship that God gives us the privilege to pursue and to follow after him. Secondly, though, I would suggest, or Scripture suggests, that God is our defender. Notice in the 63rd Psalm that Jay read for us earlier, in verses 7 through 11, what the psalmist wrote concerning God in this area. "Because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followeth after thee, thy right hand upholdeth me. But those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth, and they shall fall by the sword, they shall be a portion to the foxes. But the king shall rejoice in God, every one that sweareth by him shall glory. But the mouth of them that speaketh lies to be stopped." The psalmist brings out the idea that God, the one he was seeking after, was his defender, was willing to stand up and to take his cause for him and to protect him. In the latter part of that reading that I just read, you'll notice that he goes as far as to say, those that have ill intended for me, those that are pursuing to kill me, shall themselves fall. And how descriptive does he get when he says their portion, they shall be a portion to the foxes, or some of your translations may say jackals. In other words, they are going to fall in desolate places, and wild animals are going to eat their bodies. Now, for David, that may have been somewhat of a literal idea with physical enemies. But the idea for you and I here this morning is that God is our mighty defender. He is there for us. Notice that just before the passage that I mentioned, but where we read, that he says that I can stand under the shadow of his wings. Now, oftentimes when we hear of that, we'll think of a bird of some type, maybe a chicken is most visual, and she will gather her chicks under herself, particularly if there's prey around, and hide those little chicks under her arms. Well, you know that symbolic idea, picture only goes so far, because we just mentioned that God is going to allow the wild animals of this world to devour his enemies, or the enemies of his people. And here now we're talking about a chicken protecting her chicks. I think that while that may be relevant, the idea that's brought out here in the 63rd Psalm refers to something that we can appreciate and has even more meaning to us. You see, in the Old Testament, under the context in which this psalm was written, there was the tabernacle, or the temple, the place that to the Jews of that time represented the presence of God. And in the Holy of Holies, in the temple and in the tabernacle, there sat the Ark of the Covenant. And over the Ark of the Covenant was what was called the mercy seat, and there were two figures of cherubims with their wings reached out over top of that mercy seat. And I think what David's talking about here in this psalm is not merely a chicken trying to protect her chicks, but the fact that as someone who seeks after God, we have the ability to be in the intimate presence under the protection of the wings of his cherubims, signifying a very close relationship. Next, I would notice that God does not need large forces to protect us. You know, if you are in dire trouble and you come to me and you say, Mike, I need your help, I am limited in how much I can help you. You know, Bob, he's all the time trying to point out that he's stronger than I am. For our purposes this morning, we'll just assume that's the case. If Christian runs up to me and he says, Dad, protect me, Bob's after me. That happens sometimes. Only in a playful way, though. My ability to protect him is dependent on my strength, isn't it? And let me tell you something. In this life, there are times that our enemies outnumber and outpower the forces of our allies. And you are not alone in that. When life comes crumbling down on your life, and the people around you that even desire to help you, and sometimes they seem to be oh so few, God is not limited by their power. Think of all the Old Testament examples of Elijah and his prophet when the armies were surrounding them. And Elijah says to his prophet, or to his servant, the number that's with us is greater than the number that's with them. His servant looks at him and he says, you're crazy, basically, is what he's getting at. Elijah prays that his eyes will be opened, and when his eyes are open, he sees an army of fire surrounding the army that was about to surround them, or that was pursuing them. You see, God didn't need a mighty force. God didn't need a huge army. Remember what Gideon said? He was afraid to rebel against the Philistines and the ones that were persecuting and oppressing the Jews. And he was fearful about the size of his army. And God comes to him and he says, Gideon, all those who are afraid, tell them to go home. I'd be looking at that army and say, man, the smartest stuff have just left. They went home, they're afraid. Then God says, your army's still too big. He says, send them down to water and watch how they drink. The ones that lean down and lap like a dog rather than cupping in their hands, send them home. I'd be saying, boy, we need more people. We need a bigger army. But Gideon and his army of 300 were able to deliver the Israelites. And over again, we look at Moses, a man who has fled to the desert, who has no power, no political influence whatsoever. And God says, you'll deliver my people. You will go and take them out of slavery and lead them to what I have in store for them. When we say that God is our defender, we need to realize that his power is infinite and he doesn't need great armies. No matter how much we feel overpowered, no matter how dire the situation is, we understand that the privilege of seeking after God is a privilege of having a relationship with a mighty and precious defender. Next scripture in the 63rd Psalm in verse 6 would suggest that God is our counselor. In verse 6 we read, when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches. You see, David said in many of his psalms that he would lay at night and meditate on the counsel or the will of God. You see, we talked about God being our defender, and a great defender he is. But sometimes what I would like in my life, is not so much the kind of defender that God presents himself to be, but rather a genie. Now I bring this idea up because the idea of God being our counsel goes hand in hand with God being our defender. A lot of times what I want when I call to God to be my defender? Is God to save me from the consequences of the situation that I am in right now? But oftentimes what God provides is counsel to avoid and to improve your situations in the future. You see, God does not present himself as a genie that can have his lamp rubbed and just magically fix all of our problems. Oftentimes that's what we expect, and we find ourselves sorely disappointed that we turn to him, that we ask for help after all the decisions have been made, and things don't just magically and immediately get better. Oftentimes, and usually what God does is offer us counsel. In the 19th Psalm, just a handful of pages prior to the primary passage that we're in this morning, we studied this on Wednesday night, and in the first 6 verses, there the psalmist is bringing out the idea that God has made himself evident to mankind. And the way he's made himself evident to mankind is with his creation. And he talks about the fact that the creation that is around us makes manifest the wisdom of God. But he continues that idea in verses 7 of Psalm 19 and following, and says, "The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul, and testifying of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing in the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." Let me suggest something to you. If I come to you and I say, I have a real problem. I have this situation in my life that I need fixed. And you have the power to fix it. I'd appreciate it if you go ahead and do that for me. But how much good have you done me? You've done me good, right? You've helped me out. But how much good have you done? In comparison to if you say, Mike, I'm going to help you out with this situation, but here's how you make sure it never happens again. Here's how you make sure that your life is improved from this moment forward. This is what I'm suggesting. Oftentimes with God, we'll be disappointed in the decisions of the moment, the consequences of the circumstances that we are surrounded with. But God has offered us a blessing, a privilege that's so much greater than just simply dealing with our immediate problems. His statutes are true. His judgments are right. His commandments are beneficial for your and I's lives. And they are a counsel for this life. I may be seeming with that to downplay the idea that God is our comforter. But when we pursue God, when we seek after the Almighty Creator, we have the privilege of seeking after and having a relationship with a comforter. Look in verses 3 through 5 of the 63rd Psalm that we are in. "Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips." Now the the psalmist says a lot of beautiful things about God here. But notice what he says there in verse 5. When I'm hungry, there is no better feeling. There is no other need that outweighs satisfying that hunger. And verse 5 is saying that God is such a comforter to us that he is the equivalent of good and rich food when our souls are hungry. You see, God not only defends us from our problems, he not only presents himself as a father, he not only counsels us in our life, but he is a comforter that will be there to wrap his arms around us and to help us through those difficult times. The privilege of a good man, of a good person, is to seek after God. But I would suggest equally that it is not only the privilege, but the resolution of a good man to seek after God. The resolution of a good person. What does it mean to seek after God? It means to discover who He is. I shared with many of you a couple weeks ago, the kids and I went out on eagle hunt. Over near Salzburg, there's quite a few eagles, and we decided we were going to go out and we were going to try and find some. Well, how did we do that? You know, we didn't go out and then draw pictures of birds. We didn't go out and we didn't see robins and say, oh, imagine that bird as though it were an eagle. You see, we could do that from our home, couldn't we? All we had to do that was to look after them, but we didn't have to go seeking after them. We were privileged enough to see 3 bald eagles, though, over there in Salzburg. What a wonderful experience it was. But you know, when we sought after them, we went to where we knew they were. And we looked to find them for what they were as they were. You know, there's nothing wrong with robins or crows or turkey buzzards for that matter. But they're not eagles, are they? And when I went seeking for an eagle, there was nothing that was going to satisfy us than to find that eagle. I would suggest to you this morning that it is easy when we start to seek after God to start to create the kind of God that we would like to know. You'll hear this all the time, and sometimes it's from our very own mouths. The God that I believe in would never. I could never serve a God who. Oh, my God doesn't do that. The God I know, right? What are we doing? We are defining God. In Genesis, the first chapter, we see that God created man in His own image. And it's been said, I believe rightly so, that man's been recreating God in His image ever since. You see, when we pursue after God, we are not desiring to reinvent Him as our desires and purposes would fulfill. But rather, we should be looking and reaching out to Him to recognize Him for the God that He is. Oh, but where is He to be sought? I draw your attention back once again to that eagle hunt that we went in on. There's a lot of places we could have went that we never would have seen the eagles. And we're there on a daily basis, right? We had to know where to go to increase our chances. And the same is true of God. You know, this 19th Psalm that we referred to earlier talks about the creation and how it makes manifest or is evidence of the Creator. And that's a beautiful thing. We talked on Wednesday night about the fact that every culture known to man has believed in a Creator. Why? Because they look out and they see the evidence of a Creator. But you know, that won't get us to know God. All it does is tell us that there is a God. And if we want to know God, we have to go to where He has revealed Himself, His Word. We go to Scripture, where He has manifested Himself to mankind and said, here's who I am. Here's what can be expected of me. Here is what I desire of you. This is who and what I am. Secondly, we can look, and we read the verse earlier about His ordinances from the 19th Psalm. His ordinances tell us who He is and what He expects from us. And thirdly, we can make an earnest appeal to Him in the way of prayer. When we want to get to know someone, we want to spend time with them. We don't want to be someone to talk about them. We want to go and to be with them. And to seek God, we must know where it is that we can find Him. Thirdly, when is God to be sought? If you think once again to the closing thoughts from this 63rd Psalm, if you've noticed, we're working backwards. So we're going to close with the first 2 verses. When is it that we should seek after God? In verse 1, we read, O God, Thou art my God. Early will I seek Thee. Some of your translations may read, earnestly will I seek Thee. The King James here translates this a little more literal with the idea of early. The Hebrew word early means at the very crack of dawn, as soon as it is possible to see. Now, the other translations I don't think are wrong. If we do something early, we're earnest about seeking after Him. But we must seek God early. The best way that we can start our days is by seeking after God. You want to know if God is first in your life? Ask yourself whether He literally is first in your life. Is He the first thought that comes across your mind in the morning? Is going to prayer the first thing that you do upon waking in the morning? Are you going to seek Him early in life? If God is to be found, we must seek Him early in life if we're young. The idea here is that we don't procrastinate. When is the best time to seek after God? Now. Early. Immediately. And why is God to be sought? Look with me one last time to these verses in verses 2 through 5. To see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I praise thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. The reason we should make seeking after God our resolution is because, in short, He is lovely, and He will make happy. Mankind in the Acts, the 17th chapter, on Mars Hill, Paul addressed those Greek scholars, and he says, you are groping after God as though a man in complete darkness. And I would suggest to you, whether the world knows it or not, all of mankind is groping after God as though they are in darkness. But He has provided a light. He has provided the privilege for you and I and any else to go to His Word and to get to know the God that He is. This morning, if you look at your life and you find that you are not seeking, that you are not resolved that with every ounce of who you are to pursue and to have a relationship with the Creator of this universe, please don't delay the privilege. Please be resolved to early, to immediately, to earnestly seek after that relationship. If you're subject to the gospel call in a manner that you are not part of the Lord's body and would not like to respond in belief, by confessing Jesus' name before men, by repenting of your sins and being immersed for the remission of your sins, or if you would like to appeal to the prayers of this congregation or confess a public sin, please take advantage of this privilege by coming forward as we stand and sing.